Picture this. The streets of Nairobi, once choked with clouds of exhaust from thousands of roaring motorbikes, are beginning to hum with a very different kind of energy. Petrol fumes are giving way to clean air. The familiar putter of the boda, the backbone motorcycle taxi of East Africa, is being replaced by a nearly silent electric purr. It's not just a new sound, but the signal of a seismic economic, technological, and social shift in one of Africa's fastest-growing economies. But what's really going on beneath the surface? Are we witnessing the dawn of a revolution, or is this just another fleeting trend in the electrification hype cycle? And why is this story far more important for the future of global transportation and investment than almost anyone realizes? Today we're diving into Kenya's electric motorcycle revolution, the numbers, the players, the tech, and the surprising hurdles that could make or break this unprecedented transformation. Welcome to the battle for the future of mobility, unfolding right now on the other side of the world. Let's start with the backbone of the story, the boda. If you've ever visited Kenya or anywhere in East Africa, you can't miss them. These motorcycles weave almost magically through gridlocked streets, ferrying millions of people every day. For countless Kenyans, especially young men, owning and operating a boda is a ticket out of poverty or joblessness. It's estimated that the industry supports millions, directly and indirectly, across the nation. But there's a darker side, the clouds of pollution, constant petrol bills, and the never-ending maintenance costs that eat away at riders' meager profits. In recent years, a new breed of thinkers, entrepreneurs, and investors saw a different future. Inspired partly by the ticking clock of climate change and partly by the hard economics of everyday life, they began to ask, what if we could electrify Kenya's most essential mode of transport? What would that mean for air quality, for climate targets, for rider incomes? What would it mean for Kenya's position as a tech and manufacturing hub in Africa? This question wasn't just theoretical. Over the last 7 years, several Kenyan firms have tackled the challenge head-on. Early pilots tested imported e-motorcycles, but founders quickly discovered that off-the-shelf products from abroad fell apart on Kenya's battered roads and sprawling hills. The typical boda needs to endure punishing terrain, heavy loads, and long, unpredictable working hours. Very different from the short, smooth commutes in foreign cities where these bikes were originally designed. So, Kenyan engineers and startups dived deep into research and development, iterating relentlessly. Their mission: design electric motorcycles tough enough to survive Nairobi's potholes, rural roads, and the daily grind, but cheap enough to appeal to riders making a few dollars a day. Sometimes these firms pivoted, sometimes they failed, but step by grueling step, they slowly cratered out the blueprint for the African e-bike. Companies like RC Ride, Roam, Ampersand, and EcoBoda became household names within the tech community. In the process, they disrupted not just automotive engineering, but also Kenya's approach to urban mobility, energy use, and even job creation. Their next big hurdle was proving that these bikes could actually save riders money. Would lower operating costs, no petrol, less maintenance, fewer oil changes, outweigh the higher upfront purchase price? Riders are quick to do the math. If it doesn't make business sense, no amount of green marketing can move the needle. But then came another twist: infrastructure. Electric motorcycles don't just need charging. They need batteries that can be swapped quickly, even in the busiest parts of town. Imagine a rider losing hours of income waiting for a battery to recharge. That's a non-starter. So, these startups partnered with financiers and distribution networks and began installing charging and battery swap stations across Nairobi and other major cities. ARC Ride alone has rolled out 170 swap stations, with bold ambitions for hundreds more. All this was happening as the Kenyan government finally took a hard stance on e-mobility, recognizing its importance for climate goals and energy self-sufficiency. With more than 13% of Kenya's total greenhouse gas emissions coming from transport and a national target to become a low-carbon economy by 2030, electrifying the boda fleet became an urgent political priority. The national e-mobility policy slashed duties on electric vehicle components, promoted local assembly, and offered incentives for building charging networks. International investors, like British International Investment, the UK's development finance arm, noticed, pouring millions into startups like RC Ride to catalyze growth. But here's where things get electrifying. In just 3 years, the numbers have surged from a few dozen pilot bikes to a genuine market movement. In 2021, just 0.5% of new motorcycles sold in Kenya were electric. By 2023, it was 3.6%. And in 2024, hold on to your helmets, it hit 7.1%. That's a tenfold increase in just 3 years, with more than 4,800 new e-motorcycles sold last year alone. Market analysts know that once an innovation crosses the 5% market share threshold, what's called the tipping point, mass adoption often spirals rapidly. Electric motorcycles might not just be a niche, they could soon be the new normal. And it's not just hype. M-Copa, a fintech firm, partnered with ride-hailing giant Bolt to roll out 5,000 e-bikes, enabled by digital micropayments. Rome, a Kenyan manufacturer, wasn't just the country's fastest-growing company last year. It made Africa's top 40 in the Financial Times and Statista rankings. And heavyweights like Ampersand are scaling up, opening factories capable of producing 60 bikes a day, bringing volume and local jobs. The business case is compelling. For riders, switching to electric can lower operational costs by up to 40%. That means more money in their pockets, less spent on unreliable fuel, and less downtime. We are excited to introduce our electric bike fleet as part of our ongoing efforts to support our drivers and provide sustainable transportation solutions, says Caroline Wanjihia, Bolt's regional director. For riders, that's not just good for the planet, it's a lifeline. It's more than economics, too. These bikes are cleaner, quieter, and produce none of the choking exhaust that plagues urban neighborhoods. A recent life cycle assessment found that Kenyan e-motorcycles, thanks to the country's mostly renewable electricity grid, have a significantly lower environmental impact than their gasoline counterparts. ArcRide claims that their next 5,000 bikes will offset over 100,000 metric tons of CO2 per year, the equivalent of taking tens of thousands of cars off the road. Governments and investors are taking notice. The Kenyan government's ambitious targets call for 200,000 e-motorcycles by 2025. Spiro, another market entrant, is offering cash incentives to help motorcycle owners switch and plans to roll out over 1 million electric vehicles. New business models are erupting. Battery as a service lets riders skip the big upfront payment and simply swap out empty batteries at stations scattered across the city. Subscription financing, digital micropayments, and even blockchain-backed carbon credits, like the system being built by YNA Kenya, aiming to bring 12,000 bikes to the road, are making the switch more affordable and appealing than ever. We believe the financing solution for our enterprise is embracing Web3 blockchain technology, where someone in New York or Dubai or anywhere in the world can invest in Kenya, says Sebastian Mwara, YNA Kenya's CEO. Crucially, the impact radiates out from just the riders. Local manufacturing, battery assembly, and charging infrastructure are creating thousands of new jobs. And in a powerful twist, companies like boda are putting women in leadership roles for the first time in a male-dominated field. Including women in our operations has not only broken gender barriers, but also enriched our company's perspective and performance, says boda's co-founder Kim Chepkoit. But before we break out the celebratory sun hats and declare Kenya a global e-mobility champion, let's pause. There are some serious clouds hanging over this electric horizon. First off, let's talk about scale and sustainability. Yes, Kenya's e-bike sales are surging, but there are still over 1 million conventional motorcycles on the road. Can a handful of startups and a few thousand new electric bikes really make a dent against entrenched fossil fuel interests and deep-rooted consumer habits? How will supply chains react if global demand for batteries explodes? Most components, especially batteries, are still imported, subject to both price swings and the risk of international disruptions. If a shipping bottleneck in Asia or a surprise in lithium prices rocks the market, Kenya's e-mobility push could suddenly stall. Then there's infrastructure. Battery swapping stations in Nairobi are impressive, but the vast majority of Kenyans live in smaller cities, towns, or rural areas, places where reliable electricity, let alone dedicated swap stations, may be a distant dream. If electric motorcycles can't reach the masses outside urban centers, will adoption hit a wall? Ampersand's CEO, Josh Whale, puts it frankly, "Our new Nairobi factory is a major step forward in both scale and impact, reflecting our dedication to providing affordable EV solutions. The pressure is on to keep delivering at scale not just in Nairobi but everywhere." On the financing front, while new models like micropayments and battery leasing are promising, they require robust digital infrastructure and trust. For riders living day-to-day, Even a small risk or an unexpected fee can mean disaster. If a battery lease company collapses, or if digital payment systems are hacked or unavailable, will thousands of riders suddenly be left without livelihood? David Damberger, managing director of M-Copa Mobility, is optimistic. Partnering with Bolt represents a significant leap towards our goal of redefining mobility in Kenya through affordable financing solutions for electric motorbikes. But how stable and scalable is this whole ecosystem? And perhaps the biggest long-term question, competition. Right now, Kenyan startups have the first-mover advantage. But if the model works, it won't be long before international giants come knocking, companies with deeper pockets, cheaper products, and more established supply chains. Can Kenyan innovators stay ahead, or will they be pushed aside in their own market? There's also the looming risk of overdependence on external investors, imported parts, and foreign expertise. Can the Kenyan electric motorcycle revolution truly become self-sustaining, generating jobs and wealth at home? Or is it at risk of becoming another footnote in the global race for EV dominance, squeezed between technology superpowers? We've come to a pivotal crossroads. On the one hand, the numbers and momentum around Kenya's electric motorcycle revolution are undeniable. On the other, the challenges, supply chain vulnerabilities, financing hurdles, infrastructure gaps, and looming international competition are very real. Now, with Kenya crossing that critical tipping point for electric motorcycle adoption, the stage is set for a dramatic transformation, but also for some high-stakes choices. The next few years will be absolutely decisive. Will Kenya ride the momentum and become Africa's e-mobility powerhouse, or will the dream stall amid new obstacles? Let's look ahead and imagine three very different futures for Kenya's electric motorcycle revolution. Each one reveals what's at stake and why the world is watching. First, picture a future of unprecedented acceleration. Suppose government incentives ramp up, with lower taxes, targeted subsidies, and even special lanes or privileges for electric bodas. In this scenario, not only does electric motorcycle market share soar to 30% by 2027, but Kenya sets the gold standard for green transportation in Africa. International investors flood in. Local manufacturers expand, creating thousands of new jobs. Boda riders, who used to worry about fuel prices every day, find their operational costs cut by 40%, meaning more income, better lives, and even new opportunities for women, thanks to startups like EcoBoda breaking gender barriers in hiring and management. Kenya's cities begin shedding their notorious smog. Children walk to school breathing cleaner air. Street corners get quieter too, as the familiar motorbike rattle fades. And with the country's energy grid already rich in renewables, every e-moto mile displaces emissions at a scale that few developing countries can match. As Caroline Wanjihia, Bolt's regional director, recently put it, "We are excited to introduce our electric bike fleet as part of our ongoing efforts to support our drivers and provide sustainable transportation solutions." But of course, it's not all roses. Imagine a second scenario where rapid growth brings growing pains. International giants, say Spiro or even Asian manufacturers, spot the Kenyan opportunity and enter the market with deep pockets and huge supply chains. Local startups suddenly face a flood of cheap imports. The risk? Local innovation is squeezed out. Profits flow overseas. The supply of batteries and spare parts remains vulnerable to global shocks, the very problem Kenya's pioneers hope to solve. And if cheap imported bikes aren't designed for Kenyan roads or boda stresses, there's a risk of rising breakdowns, frustrated drivers, and even a backlash against electric mobility. In this world, the promise of jobs and industry is hollowed out. A third possible future is more nuanced: collaboration and adaptation. Kenyan firms continue innovating, but also partner with regional and international institutions. Local assembly grows, especially now, with factories like Ampersand's new Nairobi plant ramping up to 60 bikes a day. New tech emerges: better batteries, blockchain-backed carbon credits, and subscription services that let riders lease not just bikes, but energy and aftercare. Meanwhile, targeted policies build up the local parts supply chain. Is this ambitious? Yes, but it's already underway. As Sebastian Mwara, CEO of YNA Kenya, explained, "The financing solution for our enterprise is embracing Web3 blockchain technology, where someone in New York or Dubai or anywhere in the world can invest in Kenya." In this hybrid scenario, Kenyan startups grow into regional champions and scale up across Africa, just as Rome is beginning to do. The impact? A durable, export-ready green mobility industry, not just an influx of imported vehicles, but true Kenyan value creation. The stakes are high, and the outcome is not guaranteed. But what happens next will have ripple effects far beyond Kenya. Africa's transport sector is on the brink of its own green leap, and Kenya's success or failure will be the blueprint for other nations. Why does this matter to you, wherever you are in the world? Let's break down the practical impact and the lessons every entrepreneur, policymaker, and citizen can draw from Kenya's e-mobility gamble. First, if you're interested in climate action, Kenya is proof that change can happen fast, and in places you might not expect. A few years ago, almost no one saw electric motorcycles as practical for African roads. Today, thousands of riders have made the switch, cutting emissions and turning their own work into a climate solution. That's a model worth studying for any rapidly growing city grappling with pollution and congestion. If you're an entrepreneur, Kenya's story is a playbook in frugal innovation, local customization, and ambitious partnerships. These startups didn't just copy-paste technology from abroad, they adapted bikes for rugged terrain, launched battery swapping where fast charging is tough, and built unique payment models for drivers who often lack credit histories. Boda's approach, putting women in leadership, blazing trails in a male-dominated industry, shows how inclusion drives innovation. And the rise of digital micropayment systems, like M-Kopa with Bolt, proves how fintech can enable green technology adoption at scale. For policymakers, the lesson is clear. Bold policies accelerate change, but they must be matched with support for local industry and infrastructure. Kenya's national e-mobility policy was a game changer, but its impact will depend on keeping the focus on local assembly, not just finished imports. Targeted incentives for battery factories, skilled training programs, and domestic innovation could help Kenya avoid the trap of being just a cheap market for foreign products. If you're a rider or small business owner, the message is personal. Switching to an electric motorcycle isn't just good for the environment, it could increase your day-to-day income dramatically. Studies show operating costs drop by around 40%. For the average boda driver, that could mean the difference between scraping by and truly building a future. As Mikhail Gonga, Roam's chief commercial officer, has said, we're not only promoting sustainability, but also cutting operational costs remarkably for boda riders, making a meaningful impact where it matters most. And there's a lesson for all of us. Transformative change is hardest at the start, but once a tipping point is reached, like Kenya's 7% market share, momentum can carry a revolution forward. The critical thing is to keep pushing, innovating, and investing, especially in local people and solutions. But let's not ignore the hurdles ahead. The next phase will test Kenya's ability to build a resilient supply chain, develop local talent, and secure both investment and public trust. The risk of global supply shocks, like battery shortages or a sudden policy reversal, is real. So too is the challenge of scaling up charging networks from Nairobi's neighborhoods to the last mile in rural Kenya. Companies like ARC Ride, with their ambitious battery swapping networks, are making it easier, but the infrastructure race is just beginning. There's also the question of scale versus inclusion. Will the boom benefit only big urban centers, or will smart policies ensure that small towns and marginalized communities are not left behind? To keep the momentum alive, a few strategies are crucial. Deepen local manufacturing, not just assembly, but the whole value chain, from batteries to electronics. Kenya's universities and polytechnics could play a leading role in training the next generation of engineers and technicians. Innovate in financing. The boda sector includes many riders without formal credit. Digital finance platforms, pay-as-you-go models, and even blockchain carbon credits, like those piloted by YNA Kenya, can open up opportunity for all. Build public awareness. Myths and fears about electric bike range, safety, and maintenance still linger. Outreach, rider testimonials, and visible success stories are essential to winning public trust. And finally, foster collaboration, not just between startups and government, but across borders. East Africa's regional market is vast, and Kenyan e-moto champions have a real shot at becoming continental leaders. So, can Kenya keep its electric revolution rolling? The answer? It depends on the choices made right now. The momentum is real, market share is surging, startups are scaling, jobs are being created, and emissions are already dropping. With smart investment, homegrown innovation, and a relentless focus on both inclusion and sustainability, Kenya could become not just Africa's e-mobility hub, but a global example of green transformation. But if policy slips, if imports swamp local industry, Or if key infrastructure falters, the revolution could stall, and the world would lose one of its most promising climate stories. Here's a secret not everyone outside the industry knows. Kenya's e-mobility growth is powered by far more than tech. It's a social movement, led by young entrepreneurs, women breaking barriers, savvy boda riders, and a new generation that sees clean mobility as their right. The real tipping point isn't just about market share, it's about belief. And that's something no global competitor can import or copy. So, what can you do? If you're in Kenya, look around. Are boda riders in your neighborhood switching to electric? Ask them about their experience. Support local startups. Push for smart policy. If you're elsewhere, look to Kenya for inspiration and lessons. Share this story, because the world still underestimates the speed and breadth of change happening on Africa's roads. And if you care about the future of clean mobility, join the conversation. Subscribe for more deep dives into the green transformations reshaping our world, and let us know, what's the most exciting mobility innovation you've seen? Kenya's electric motorcycle revolution is just getting started. Whether it becomes a lasting success or a missed opportunity depends